for tennis to be one of the first to really compete at the varsity level, to represent Harvard, and knowing probably where the beginnings of that were, and probably a very austere experience.
Jack Barnaby, who had been the men's squash and tennis coach for years, graduate class of 1932, he took on getting a lot going with women's tennis.
Jack Barnaby asked me to meet him for the first time at the Harvard Varsity Club, which in those days was across from Lamont. And what that club was basically much better food for the athletes in season. Athletes meaning the men athletes. So when I went to meet with him, the guys running it said, "Oh, no, you can't come in here." And I said, "Well, Coach Barnaby told me to meet him here." So I waited for him to come, and then they let me in. So there I am with all the guys on the baseball team, the crew team, the lacrosse team, and me.
In 1973, Title IX was passed. Right from the beginning of that piece of legislation, in many cases, right on the Harvard campus, the male teams were resistant to giving up their space and sharing it on an equal basis between the men and the women, be it in the swimming pool, in the rink, on the basketball court, or the tennis courts.
The janitor didn't like that the girls were using the boys' gym and turned out the lights on us.
We had some pretty good tennis players at Harvard as the program developed. Lisa Muscatine and Denise Stahl, who did very well on the programs in the mid-'70s. And they went on to become Rhodes Scholars and very successful people in life. But they helped get stuff kind of really going and developing.
While it was very frustrating, we did have to be active in voicing our concerns. It's not hugely surprising that it took some time. We were Radcliffe the first year I was there. We practiced. There used to be tennis courts at Radcliffe. I don't think there are tennis courts at Radcliffe anymore.
When ITT opened up, we had a Greater Boston tournament there, and there was a track meet going on around. Problems with the courts. One is that the sun would come in through those big windows and be blinding, even though you had some opaque nets. It wasn't adequate height-wise. So on one side, you had just blinding sun. The other problem was that I discovered during this match, and I actually remember the woman I was playing. Of course I do. How silly, but I do. And she hit a ball through the gap in the net, and I went to get the ball, which had left the court, and I got tackled by a hurdler, literally flattened like a pancake by a hurdler in the middle of a track meet. And that, I think after that, I really never liked that building very much.
I can remember a very famous professor calling me up and saying, get those kids, those undergraduates off the courts at 3:00. And I said, well, you've got night and you've got most of the day, but 3 to 6, no way. The players are going to have it. And, I'm going to take this to the faculty meeting, I said, you can take it any way you want, but that's the way it's going to be.
Palmer-Dixon had its quirky things. It was this sort of older building. It had these lovely older men that booked the courts. But one of the things I remember is that it had a candy machine that if you wanted a snack or something like that, you could put in your quarters. But there were these kinds of candy machines at the time, similar to the ones now where there's a dial and the thing drops down. But this was the thing where there were about 6 or 7 slots of candy bars, and then a thing would flip up, and that's the one that would fall down if you wanted a candy bar. Except Palmer-Dixon also apparently had mice. And there was a time where there was a candy bar in the window of the machine that had been partially eaten.
The bummer part was that we only had 3 courts. So it was fine for practices, but matches lasted could be 5 hours that we were down there for matches.
After practice, we were all sweaty and we had to walk across the Charles River.
That walk over the river is sort of ingrained in my brain. Freezing cold, winds whipping, but you're with your teammates and your friends and you're laughing and just making the best of it.
The gear didn't exist. You just wore white clothes. You just wore whatever you had that was white.
We had no uniforms that I can remember.
I have my freshman year sweatsuit, which was a brand called Paul Sullivan. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it's the freshman year one that we had. I have these, several t-shirts. I have those Harvard women's tennis t-shirts that look like Charlie's Angels.
My freshman year, we actually had to raise money for the team, and so we had a bake sale. I think we all went to our housemaster's kitchens, the house's kitchens, and made some food, and then we sold it. I'm sure the Board of Health wouldn't approve at this point, but we did. We probably made about $7 on those bake sales. And then Dawn Usher came up with this silhouette of the t-shirt that many of you still have in your closets, of a silhouette of Charlie's Angels. And we sold those t-shirts too. And according to Dawn, we made about $13 on those. So it was a very fruitful exercise.
They asked us to sell these t-shirts, and they have a Charlie's Angels logo on them with 3 women, playing with rackets in their hand. And what surprised me was when I tried to sell them, all these guys were buying them from me, which is hilarious. I was never the kind of person to sell things, but I managed to sell all of my t-shirts and more because the men wanted them.
We got an influx of a bunch of quite strong players, and then Peter Felski left and Dawn Usher was the coach for my last 3 years. And then we started to get Adidas warm-up suit gear. We started to get rackets.
I'll never forget, we were fresh off the plane in LA in these puffy white tracksuits and that were very unattractive.
Her outfits were not that cute. I'll tell you that. We actually bonded over that, so it was a bonding moment through our 4 years.
I know one of my daughters still has one of my Harvard tennis outfits that they wore when they dressed up for Halloween.
Peter Felski became the coach in the late 70s, and he pushed very hard for women's teams to have good schedules. We took our first trip abroad to Oxford and Cambridge.
We ended up with a wonderful team. We had Martha and Sally and Meg and Leslie and Libby. And so that first year, 1978, we won a lot of matches locally, but we got beaten up pretty badly down south with Duke and Chapel Hill. The time went by and we went on. We got better and better. We brought in better players. So by 1981, they had Maria Pay, Tina Bugas, Debbie Kaufman was to come in the next year with Elizabeth Evans and Erica Smith. And so when I left in 81, Dawn Usher had a really solid team to work with.
In the 80s, Dawn Usher was a great teacher of tennis and worked beautifully with individuals, became the coach. And we began to have tremendous success in the people that we played. And we started playing teams north, south, across the country, and with some success at that.
You were the coach for the first Ivy League title, and the second and the third.
And the fourth and the fifth. Other than the first year where I think we lost once to Yale, I don't think we lost more than 2 matches in my entire coaching career in the Ivy League.
I was lucky enough to be part of that first Ivy League championship team, and I remember we were playing Yale and Palmer-Dixon. I happened to be the last match on with my doubles partner Erica Smith, who was a wonderful doubles player and carried me. But we clinched the match, And I remember that Erica was so excited that she picked me up and she was hugging me so tight, and she was a lot taller than I was, and my head was nestled in her armpit. And I didn't know if I was dizzy from the position of my head or from just the sheer joy of winning our first Ivy League title, but it was a lasting memory nonetheless.
Women's sports at that time were definitely considered second place. Most everything went towards the men's sports. Martina Horner gave us $3,000 a year because we had the largest program in the country. My recollection of those years is twofold. One is the players, and two are the parents. Marshall Berkman, Donald Kaufman, and Ron Boss. So they took over the fundraising, and that's how we could do things that there was no way under the Harvard budget we would done. The Harvard budget paid for 100% of all matches in New England and not a dime elsewhere.
We played Stanford on our spring trip, and they, at the time, because they were number one, they had a lot of funding. They had a huge scoreboard, and so we were playing doubles, and our score was going up on our names, and our score was up on the scoreboard. And there was a point where we were ahead. And I don't remember how much ahead, but we were like, God, we should take a picture of that.
It was a great but complicated time to be a women's tennis player in the 80s at Harvard. But it was very good in so many ways. And we had people who were really working hard to have the team operate together.
Figuring out who was going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get your training together and as a team. And so you'd have challenge matches as well as train together as a team, and just working through that dynamics of the psychology of beating or losing to your friend and determining that hierarchy within a team-oriented group.
Our team at least seemed to like to complain about the lineup before every match. So I remember we were out in California on our spring break, and everybody was complaining about the lineup, which was just what we did. We ate breakfast, we had lunch, dinner, and then we complained about the lineup. So I guess I drew the short straw, and I was told to go and talk to the coach, Don Usher, and tell him that we weren't happy with the lineup. And so I went down to where Don was staying, and I, for the umpteenth time, this was sort of a ritual, I told him that we weren't happy with the lineup. And to which Don, had his frustration had peaked. I remember he took the lineup book and he threw it down at my feet and he said, "You make the lineup." So I sat down, I thought, I usually play 4, 5, or 6, but I think tomorrow maybe I'll play number 1.
Don left as we moved toward the end of the 80s, and Ed Kratz came, and at first as coach he did very well. We look at wins and losses. We had a couple of great seasons under his leadership as we came into the 90s, and Gordon Graham became coach. He coached them for 17 years. So by the time that Gordon became coach, we had a very, I consider, smooth operating program for women, and he was able to do well, had great success, and cruise along in good style.
We were all losing. I remember looking down the courts at the score and all that we were down in all the matches. And then slowly, one match started to win, and then the other matches started to win. And that moment of winning the Ivy title, where we all came together on court 2 to cheer together, was probably my most fondest memory.
After 33 years of Harvard women's tennis, in 2007, Harvard Athletics hired the first ever female Harvard women's tennis coach. Not only is Tracy Green the first woman to be in charge of the women's tennis program at Harvard, but she is also the first on either the men or women's side to be an NCAA champion herself. Tracy Green is also the first Black coach in any sport in the history of Harvard to win an Ivy League championship.
Many of my favorite memories are associated with trips that I took with the tennis team. Our spring trips down to North Carolina my first 2 years, and then to Southern California my second 2 years, because it was a great way to get to know teammates and really bond with them, feel like part of a team.
We were out in California, and I drove south in the wrong direction. I think we were supposed to play the University of Washington and Long Beach. And I drove in the wrong direction through orange groves, and nobody knew anything about that. And I realized I turned around, and then I don't even think they noticed that I turned around. But we were 45 minutes late. They could have defaulted us.
We were in vans. What a treat. And how totally exhausting, but incredibly bonding.
We enjoyed all being together in this big van and, traveling to different matches and tournaments.
Just the togetherness. I think being in the van and just the silliness. And, we all had these silly Walkman, these tape recorders, and we would share, the tapes back and forth, these cassette tapes. And, it was just a really great supportive time.
Oh, we had great memories of zooming around in the van, to the matches. It was pretty fun. We'd be singing at the top of our lungs sometimes, or buying all this trail mix.
We were looking for a place to stay, and everything was booked up. This is awful. So we ended up, I ended going west of 95 to find a motel, and everywhere we went, they were booked. I couldn't believe it. So we finally found a place, and the team will remember this better than I will, but I ended up staying in the lobby of the motel for the night, sort of leaning back on a love seat. And the team was given, the only thing they had was like a handicapped room that they saved, and they went in there, and I think they gave them cots. Somehow they managed. But I don't think they wanted to talk to me the next day.
I remember we were on our way back from Princeton, and we were driving, and the van was making a little clickety clank, clank, clink, clank, and then it just died on the side of the road. I remember Don Usher, our coach, looked into the van, looked in the back of the van, looked at the person who seemed most awake and maybe most in shape, and chose Maria Pay to walk back the 2 or 3 miles with him to the nearest gas station to get the car going again.
Deanne and I had some interesting experiences down in Clemson, and one night we ended up going with a couple of our college friends, or my college friends, to Atlanta, and got back in time to go to practice in the morning.
Good memories always involve food. We were always trying to, find good food, and we always had bagels on our road trips, bags and bags of bagels. Erica Schulman spent a lot of time eating bagels too, and she's, as skinny as a stick.
The food moments were very important to us as a team. We had bonding moments around pizza, pretty much pizza after games, after matches, or on Friday nights from Uno's.
The freshmen dress up in various costumes on a certain night. It was sort of like I wouldn't call it an initiation because it was very tame, and we actually looked forward to that night, but it involved each having a costume that we would wear and eating all sorts of very disgusting combinations of foods.
There were often visitors to Harvard who would come and have an interest in playing tennis. And they, for some reason, wanted to always pit themselves against the women players. And they were always men who wanted to pit themselves, middle-aged men of note, in their field, their profession, who wanted to come and be matched up with a Harvard tennis player from the team. So I ended up having to play several princes, Derek Bach, who was the former president of Harvard, and many other noteworthy people who would come by looking to play one of the women on the team. I always thought that was kind of funny. It was fun in a way to connect with these people, but it was funny that they all thought that was going to be a good matchup. They wanted a good matchup.
My last 20 years, I've actually been involved in education, specifically targeting low-income students and just educational equity.
Work for several years as a federal prosecutor in New York.
I went to work for the CDC as what we call a disease detective, an epidemic intelligence service officer.
I decided I might need to pick a path that didn't involve the tropical rainforest and living, in a tent in leeches. And that's when I decided that I would go to vet school.
Ended up going to law school finished law school and then kind of went on basically a legal career after that.
I then applied to medical school after having taken 2 years, and I ultimately got a master's degree at the School of Public Health, and then I went to Penn to medical school.
Ended up working at the Washington Post. And then after that, I moved back to New York and had a series of jobs. I worked at Vogue magazine. I got my master's in journalism at New York University.
I also served as the management committee member for the Singapore Tennis Association while in Singapore. And during that time, I was able to put on the, WTA championship.
And then I went to Wharton for business school. After business school, I went into private equity.
Becoming the director of acquisitions for all of the commercial real estate in New York, Florida, and California.
I really was interested in career advisory and recruiting for finance. And so I did that for 8 years at another firm. And then about 7 years ago, decided to start my own firm.
And now I've been working as a primary care pediatrician at Woodinville Pediatrics for the last 4 years.
And then went on to work at the UN in Vienna for a little bit, and then came back to the States and started a career as a private investigator in the corporate world in forensic investigations.
I don't know that, without Title IX that I would have been noticed, or I would have been, that they sent the admissions dean out to my house to try to convince me to come. So for me, Title IX was just huge in just that whole striving to bring equity to the men's and women's experiences. So I was really fortunate to benefit from that.
To have those experiences, it was really sort of completely integral to my whole college experience. I don't think I would have been there if I hadn't been a tennis player and gotten to be a part of that. And it was, it was a really significant part of my life. And I'm, just glad to have been a part of it and to have had that time.
I didn't realize how early the history of women's tennis was when I was in it. It was in context, something I didn't appreciate as much. And 50 years is not a long time. And the women that came before us were obviously truly trailblazers, right? It wasn't easy, I'm sure, being that first women's team.
These 50 years of women who have been part of the Harvard tennis program, our women now and our women later owe it to them too, to represent them in a way that's honorable. And so, this is kind of just ongoing, never-ending endeavor that everyone has a place in.